Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Leo Scherman, a director and producer who's worked on shows like Scare Tactics and Cocked Guns. You may also know him as Darren Shunt on The Amazing Gale Pyle. His first feature as a writer-director, Trench 11, stars Rossif Sutherland, Sean Benson, Charlie Carrick, and Corinne Vanasse in a thriller about a squad of Allied soldiers who find something horrible in a secret German bunker during the final days of World War I. It's playing in theaters across Canada right now, and available on iTunes in North America today. Leo picked The Vanishing, George Sluizer's 1988 thriller about three people united by a terrible mystery: a young woman who disappears, the boyfriend who can't let her go, and the utterly ordinary man who holds the key to all their fates. It took a few years to break in North America, but once it did, it was an art house sensation, hanging on through clever advertising and passionate word of mouth for years in rep cinemas. 3 decades later, it still packs a hell of a punch for those willing to seek it out, which has its own cruel irony to it. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I don't know how many of your listeners... I suspect your listeners will know the film very well because of it's a kind of curated audience, but yeah, it's surprising how many people don't. If you go to a bar, and I don't mean go tap a stranger, but if you go to a bar with a group of people, and if they're not all in film, I'll give you an example. I literally just left a group of people. It's with Rossif Sutherland.
So you, just to set the stage, you're on your press day.
Yeah, exactly. We're doing some... He was doing his press today. And we all went up and I literally just came from a pint and came over here. And there was a guy there who's a podcast... He runs a podcast, and there was a couple of producers, and there were some people from PR. Not one of them knew the movie.
Really?
Yeah, not one of them had seen it, and only sort of heard about it. And that's my example. And these are really smart people. These are people who are in our business, and yet it's still, oddly enough, I feel, not fully known. And
I mean, I'm coming from a place where 30 years ago, when it was making rounds at the art house, it was... it played the Blur, it played the Paradise must have had it. It played in Toronto forever.
It did?
Was always on.
It had a good long run?
Yeah, it ran forever at the Carlton, I think, but then it always hung around. It was one of those rep staples like Wings of Desire and Liquid Sky, one of those mid-'80s films that never went away.
Right.
Because, and especially for this film, of course, you would always want to take someone to it. You would watch them watch the movie.
That's right. And get to the ending.
Yeah, if you know the ending, you're ahead.
Yep.
You're ahead of the game.
And then the conversation after is very satisfying.
Yeah. And it was like re-experiencing your own trauma through somebody else, which of course is what the movie is about.
That's right.
And it just set itself up and lend itself perfectly to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm surprised that it's faded, but I'm kind of also not surprised, because it is one of those movies that for a lot of people, as soon as they found out what happened, it was done for them.
Right.
Which is weird, right?
Right.
Like, it's not a film... It is a film you can revisit, but it's not a film you want to. And so between that and I know what happens, I don't need to put myself through that again.
Maybe you're right. Sort of like a Sixth Sense type of phenomenon.
Yeah, where everyone is talking about it and then nobody is.
Yeah, and I think that underserves it. Mm-hmm. Because I actually do think that, I've seen it countless times. The ending is really just the cherry on the cake. It is profoundly compelling all the way through. Yeah. And actually... because it's also edited in a non-linear manner, it does lend itself to multiple viewings, because you're kind of seeing the pieces come together in different ways each time. And the more familiar you are with film, on later screenings, I feel like that's what makes a masterpiece for me, is that can you watch it endless amounts of times, and does it continue to offer things, and as you age, has it changed your point of view on it? And it has. I think that's totally... I think you're right. I think when I was younger and I first saw it, it was really all about that crazy ending. And really, to me now, like I said, the ending is obviously still a factor, but there's so much else going on in that movie.
Oh yeah, no, it's not a gimmick picture at all.
Not at all, exactly.
But it was sort of marketed as
and
at least in North America, and I think that turned people against it over time, because when you see the video box and you're like, the ending, it's, well...
I think you're 100% right. And I actually also think that probably the fact that it is many people have said it is up there with the worst remakes ever.
Oh yeah, we'll get there.
We'll get there later.
I'm saving that because it will immediately derail this conversation.
That's right, but I think because of that, maybe you know. But nonetheless,
Yeah.
I still feel oddly, as odd as that might sound to you, I still feel that it's somehow a little under the radar.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Well, to frame that a little bit more, when did you first see it?
I got to it late.
Okay.
I didn't see it until I was in my 20s.
Okay.
And it was somehow it was when I really went full, you know, into film, and I went into kind of like Matrix level consumption of everything, and it was always on that list. And I have a personal, I really like European thrillers. That's one of my favorite things, one of my favorite genres. And so it was obviously always there. I don't know how it had just sort of slipped the cracks. It might have been availability issues if I look back. It's possible that it wasn't, I'm not sure. But anyway, it just, for whatever reason, I hadn't seen it until I was in my 20s. And I was living with who is now my wife, and she was my girlfriend at the time. And we were living together, and it was winter, like January. And she was doing her graduate degree in architecture, and they went on some trip to Rome. And I watched it alone at home on a really cold night.
That's no way to...
Yeah, and it's like it's January, so you're already kind of predisposed to... And it just rocked me. Like, it totally rocked me. And I couldn't... And this was like long enough ago that... email we weren't at a place now where you could just text or email her, right? So I actually had a kind of window there where it had such a profound effect. It really floored me, and it was a strange experience because everything about the movie, I just liked everything about it. It was one of those ones where I should have seen it 10 years earlier. It's for me, that's the kind of thing that I like. It ticked off every box.
Right. Yeah, I saw it with an audience at the Bloor, which is this big, now the Toronto Hot Dog Cinema or whatever they're calling it this week, but it's this big cavernous theater, and you could just hear people holding their breath. Was
it a late night screening?
It was an evening screening. It was half full, I would say, and it was like a 7 o'clock. You came out into the night and people were just freaked out. It was amazing.
When you went, was it a big deal?
No, I think I caught up to it late. I had definitely missed the press screenings. I wasn't. But it had arrived, it was a thing by the time I caught up to it. And I had avoided reading anything about it. I just heard that it was a horror film that wasn't a horror film. That was the pitch going in, that it was...
It was a horror film, but it wasn't a horror film. There's no blood.
Yeah, that it was a disturbing film that wasn't specifically a horror movie. And it delivered, totally. But the experience of watching that with a crowd was really something. And I can only imagine... I'm assuming about half of them had seen it.
Oh, it was like a repeat screening.
Yeah, it was definitely a rep screening.
Right.
But it was a really interesting experience, because thinking back, I was remembering that there was a couple of snickers here and there that felt weird, and I just assumed I was missing something in the translation.
Right.
And now it's like, no, you guys are reacting to him.
They knew what was coming.
To Bernard-Pierre Donadieu, and how just incredibly perfectly flat and terrifying his effect is.
Totally.
Because he's the guy who... Your classic, what is now your classic movie sociopath, which is the person who gives away nothing and looks completely ordinary and boring.
That's right.
But at the time, and I think the film being in another language helps immensely for a North American audience, because we're still trying to learn the rhythms of people and understand how the language works and who they are. And here's this person you cannot fix on in the same way that the hero can't fix on him.
Yep. And
you're drawn in by that weird stillness that he projects that gets creepier and creepier as the movie goes on.
I think it's true. I speak French. I used to speak it fluently, but I my ear for French is very good. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, though, even though it's in another language, there is a banality by design to his performance that I think really does land. Because I agree with you. Like, often when you watch films in a foreign language, if you don't know the language, I feel like everything feels more real, more realistic. And part of that is because you're not picking up on the nuances of a performance the same way. Mm-hmm. But I guess I just say that because I do really get French, and I So I was rewatching it in advance of this, and that's something that really stood out, was that there's just a kind of casualness to everything about what he does. They don't overplay any of it.
Yeah.
But I think that's really one of probably the core themes of I presume the book as well, but that's definitely one of the core themes of the movie, is the banality of evil.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a recurrent, from how I view it, I think it's a recurrent European idea, and I really think it's just because of World War II and what they experienced.
Yeah.
There was a banality to how horrible somebody could be. They weren't all stark raving mad. And I think you're right, because I think that in many ways up to that point, generally speaking, guys who were as crazy as him played more crazy.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you would get, like, the Bruce Dern performance from the 70s to the 80s, and the crazed Vietnam veteran, that was defining.
Yeah, like, was it Black Sunday?
Yeah,
the Frankenheimer
one
movie?
of them. That's the biggest one.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sort of defined a type of madman, as we understand it.
Yeah, or the bad guys in Death Wish, or Dirty Harry or whatever. Yeah,
just people who exist as animals to wreak havoc and do harm. And here you have a guy who's like, he's just tossing off his lines, and he's really casual. He's making eye contact. He's doing all the things that regular people do, but the things coming out of his mouth are just so disturbing. And then the more time we spend with him, everything he does is so wrong on some level, some fundamental offness, that it really gets under your skin. The last time I saw it, I was worried that it would seem that I would now pay too much attention to him, that he'd be too big. But no, he's
not.
Yeah,
it's so understated. By design, on his performance, but clearly the direction. It's very understated.
Yeah, and it sets him against everyone else. Well, I mean, he really only has one other person to play off of, but that character is in such a manic, frenzied state that his calm looks more disturbing by contrast.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think it's also it's just the way the story works by having him as a family man, and the scenes, I think, are really quite brilliant with his family, because I have 2 daughters, and that character has 2 daughters, and it's like really weird because I think they do a good job of getting you to a place where, I'm not trying to say that I or somebody else can start to identify with what he's doing, but I just think there's something very fascinating about his ability to still be a nice family man and to still, pick his daughter up at school and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And he's normal at home, right?
Yeah. And he's not compartmentalizing it. He's just a different person.
That's exactly it. He's not compartmentalizing it. He doesn't have a split personality, and he's not, like dressing up. It's like, no, it's just, this guy's pretty rational, and he's a professor, and he's got a family, and he's very bourgeois, and yet he obviously has, empathy issues, and he is by, sociopath by definition. But I just think it's still, to me, one of the greatest portrayals of what we call a psychopath. Yeah. I really do.
It is remarkable too, because when you unpack the film afterwards, and realize, the cruelty of the ending is one thing as an audience member, because it is just absolutely pure nihilism, and just, oh, sorry, no, did I not mention that this was going to go to a terrible place? But the performance becomes even more impressive in retrospect when you realize that, and obviously it's the script and it's a contrivance, but it works so beautifully. He gives nothing away. He is telling the truth all along. He's just being a complete dick about it, and it's absolutely merciless.
And I think that's a really good point, because a lot of times you go out of your way to trick the audience, to manipulate, and that's okay. I'm not fully against that. I mean, Spielberg's built a really incredible career doing that.
Yeah. It absolutely has its place as a storytelling tool, and
it does, and more power to it. And Hitchcock, was really into that. But that is what's very refreshing about this film, and something I very much identify with, is that you, as a director, directing actors, it's brutal when there is a contrivance, because a lot of actors, it just becomes artificial. So you can deliver it and you can do it, but there's always something that rings untrue to you. I mean, this is a question of taste right now, but that's what I find so compelling, is that, no, you're totally right. Everything he's doing, he's being truthful to the audience. They're showing you everything. They're not. I mean, the only contrivance that way is that it is non-linear. The way that the information is parceled out is very interesting because I believe the book is not structured that way, and my understanding from what I know is that the original screenplay, which was written by the journalist who wrote the novel, they go back, him and the director, Sluizer, is how you pronounce it?
Sluizer, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
They go back, well, I'm
And
saying it
it's-
in French, but he's Dutch. I'm not sure how you pronounce
And
it.
it's Tim...
Tim Krabbe. But they're actually Dutch, both of them. It was a French-Dutch co-pro, but they're Dutch. So
Right.
they go back, they did a project together before this one. So he started writing the novel, and Sluizer got his hands on the manuscript before it was published and
Okay.
bought the rights to the book. And so they started, and he said, I'm going to buy the rights and I want you to develop the screenplay. And he did, but my understanding is they actually ended up having a bit of a falling out because from what I know, the story did not structure itself in the non-linear manner that the edit of the film does. Interestingly, the director did edit it himself.
Right. I mean, it would be very different if it went from A to B to C.
It would. When I last viewed it and I knew that, I felt that was part of the genius of the film, in fact, is that that the way it's told, again, it's not about trickery and deceit, and sometimes that's okay. It's like, Christopher Nolan is pretty good at that too, right?
No, Memento is the film that immediately springs to mind in terms of
Yeah.
how to mirror the storytelling impact of this film.
But I felt like this one, it's like, I think that's one of the things about it is that, so Hitchcock had his theory on suspense, which is that the more the more you give the audience in terms of the characters, the more there's suspense because they know now that that's the killer.
Right.
Right. The famous conversation he had with Truffaut where it was surprise versus suspense. So if you don't know who the killer is the whole movie, and at the very end it's like da da da, it's this person. That can be very effective, but that's a different energy than knowing the whole time that in fact that's the killer.
Oh,
so it's like frenzy. You know the whole time. And that's the suspense actually comes in the fact that the other characters don't know. So every time you see the killer and victim in the room.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's what this really played on, because you can really misplay your hand by revealing certain things. But I feel like when I looked at it, that's what really works. It's somehow about when they introduce him as the villain and how it's being slowly played out. It's really, it's really, really, really well edited. And I heard, I read, and I don't know if I'm assuming it's true, I read somewhere that Kubrick, upon seeing it, he called the director.
In fact, Sluizer tells the story on the
does he?
Blu-ray. Yeah.
Oh man,
they have that's the section that they excerpted for the Criterion website, so you can actually find it without owning the disc.
Oh, like on YouTube.
They posted it. It's part of the film's webpage, and then also it's on YouTube. But he said that Kubrick saw the film somewhere and contacted him and said, it's absolutely terrifying. And Sluizer's response was, "Oh, The Shining is scary. Come on, you made The Shining." And Kubrick basically said, "No, The Shining is not scary. That your movie is scary." And it's so simple and so weirdly charming an observation that I think that is great, because it also acknowledges that Kubrick knows he didn't really make a horror movie with The Shining, which is one of those fascinating artifacts where I think it's really interesting as a film, but it's not scary.
Yeah, it's not really. You have some moments of gore or visual shock. Yeah.
But it's
like jump scares.
Yeah, but it's a film about why things frighten people, which is how he approached it, and that I find that really interesting. But The Vanishing is a film that literally locks you in with desperation and terror and the lack of knowledge and things being withheld, and of course that would terrify Kubrick. It scares anybody, but the idea of Stanley Kubrick watching a movie in which someone consents to a total loss of control,
exactly,
I could imagine him just clawing at his armrests.
Well, there you go, because that is it. It's not just we've been talking so much about the villain, but that's also why it's so psychologically disturbing, is that there's a bit of a be careful what you, what's the old saying?
Be careful what you
wish for, but the curiosity killed the cat. It's that this obsession that this poor guy has. He doesn't have to drink the coffee at the end. He doesn't have to make the choices he does, and in fact, he's told that.
Yeah,
and
repeatedly.
And I think that is also awful, because I feel like the film does touch, which makes a ton of sense for Kubrick, because it does touch on artistic obsession and passion. And there's that speech that he gives when he's talking, when his wife suspects him of having an affair.
Right.
And she says, why do you keep going, why are you spending all this time at your country home? And of course he's spending all the time out there because he's got his victim locked up out there, and planning for it. But he gives a speech, and in that speech he talks about passion, about getting an idea in your head, and then you move one step forward, and it's this whole, and he's really, what he's talking about is any form of obsession or passion. And there's a danger in that, right? And it can go both ways. And so, that makes sense why Kubrick would have gone that way. I also heard that Kubrick did specifically say that he thought the editing, because Suzy himself did cut the film, which is quite rare. He apparently commented that he thought it was just extraordinary.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the precision of it would totally appeal to him. But it's also a great representation formally of what the characters are experiencing, because there's a plan and we don't understand it.
Yeah.
And I have seen films that use nonlinear editing well. I have seen films that just don't understand what it's for and do it anyway.
Yeah.
I just saw something that opens with a flash forward. What is it? Oh, it's playing at TIFF. It's called The Sweet Requiem. It opens with a key moment in a character's backstory, but then it proceeds to unfold that backstory parallel to her present-day story for the length of the film. So we know where it's going, and so does she, as an adult, because she was there, but we still have to watch 40-odd minutes of these characters in flashbacks heading towards this point. And once you figure it out, once I figured it out in the theater, it's just, why did you choose to tell it this way? Because this is dumb. Like, you're actually, unless I walk in late, your film is undercutting itself.
Yeah.
Because you're clearly telling me that this is a dramatic high point.
I think sometimes people do end up having to re-edit because there's other problems happening.
Sure,
and sometimes the feedback you start to get is that it's too boring, right? For too long.
Well,
and
Soderbergh supposedly recut out of sight after a first test that was linear.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
and Alimi.
I thought the Lamy was designed that way when they shot it, but
was
the
it?
screenwriter didn't.
Lem Dobbs.
Yeah, Dobbs doesn't like it, but Soderbergh had it in mind.
Oh, okay. I thought, for some reason, maybe I was thinking about it because I always thought that the Lamy had been recut after Lem Dobbs was pissed off about it. But.
He is definitely pissed off about it. But it was written as a linear script, but Soderbergh jumbled it.
Right.
I think it was on his mind while he was shooting, and it was never cut linear.
Right.
But Out of Sight was, and they found it disappointing, so he scrambled it.
Yeah, for that reason.
Yeah,
because you get audience tests or whatever say it's slow, it's too slow, I don't care what's happening, not enough. So then you flash forward earlier and you give everybody... Well, and that's sort of what to come back to that, I mean, that's sort of what I'm saying, is that I it's a very difficult alchemy to get right, and most people don't get it right, and it's usually a bit of a cop-out, and in this case, I think it's just done absolutely brilliantly. And I'm not sure the film would have the same impact if it wasn't structured the way it is. No,
I think you're right. I mean, there is a version of this that goes from A to B to C, and it is the remake, and it's terrible.
Well, there you go. That's I didn't want to go there, but that's exactly right.
Let's do it,
And that's what's fascinating about the remake, which Sluizer did himself. Mm-hmm. Which he didn't write the screenplay for.
Yeah,
right?
But he famously said, if it's going to go wrong, I'm going to be the one to do it. And look what happened.
Yeah, there's a part of me too, and I do not criticize him for it. There's a part of me also, just as I get older and you kind of live life, he was in his mid to late 50s when he made the original. Mm-hmm. He's not like he was lighting the world on fire financially, presumably, right? Yeah. He made all the documentaries in Holland. He was an artist in Holland in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. There's a part of me that wonders what that paycheck looked like. That remake paycheck was probably, at his stage...
I'm sure it cost more than the film did.
Well, exactly, and the paycheck probably was guaranteed to get him out of whatever debt he may have been in, and would have set him up. He probably looked at that and went, what's the worst case scenario here? And I do wonder that, and I know that's being a bit cynical, but I'm being honest about that.
I think that's reasonable. I mean, certainly... if you are this guy and you are given the opportunity to come to Los Angeles or Seattle or wherever they shot it and work with Jeff Bridges, who even then was...
He was a good actor.
An incandescent presence. This is a year after The Fisher King.
Totally.
Why would you not?
Totally.
And I think also the appeal of the experiment, because he's clearly interested in what-if scenarios and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Why not take a shot at it? But
it doesn't...
And he got to co-discover Sandra Bullock, which is something that
that's right.
he gets no credit for.
But it is a soulless film.
Yeah.
And that's what's so strange about it. And
fascinating.
It might be one of the reasons as well, maybe, that over time the film has become so important to me, because there's some, and I don't know what it is, but there's a lesson somewhere in there, and maybe the lesson is just 20/20 hindsight, right? But there's a fear in there, because I think making films is really hard. Making really good films is extraordinarily hard. And all great filmmakers have made, for the most part, maybe Kubrick is the only, everyone else has made a bad film, right? Maybe Orson Welles didn't.
Yeah, Eyes Wide Shut. I still don't like it.
Right. Well, it's not bad, but you might not, it's not great. But most filmmakers have actually made films that are actually really not good. Like, they don't work. And that happens, and that's life, right? So big deal.
It's chemistry, right? It's alchemy.
Exactly.
One piece is off.
This is the thing. And so, and you don't know that before. Because if you did, nobody would ever make a bad movie.
Sure.
So there's something so strange about him kind of redoing his own movie, and now he's got all the time and money in the world. And admittedly, I feel like he's clearly such a European person that doesn't... You can tell when you're watching the remake that's America in the movies. It's not real America.
Yeah, the feel is wrong.
It just doesn't... It feels artificial. The whole thing feels artificial. Whereas really one of the greatest assets of the original is that it's so real. Mm-hmm. It's like real, like the way a Michael Haneke movie is real. Like it's like, that's Holland, that's France.
There's nothing fussed about it. There's no fancy lighting. There's no weird shafts through the trees or anything like that.
No, it's not
just people, houses, cars.
Exactly. It's not stylized. It's, again, coming back to that word banal. It's very, and that's a very European style. Mm-hmm. I think of like Benny's Video.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's a certain, Europeans do that very well, and so. Clearly, the remake is just feels very artificial, but there's more to it than that. And I don't know. I would love. I mean,
well, there's whatever.
Do you know more? Like, do you know what did the director ever say why he thought it didn't work?
I've only seen the most vague coverage of it. Everybody kind of receded from it so quickly because like not only was it a failure artistically and financially, but the comparisons immediately just damned it. It was as though the thing was an abomination that had crawled out of a hole and had to be driven back in with fire. So it was so roundly rejected and profoundly condemned.
Like, do you remember when it came out, having been a fan of the original?
Well, by the time it did come out, I was a member of the working press. I was at the first press screening in Toronto, which was a small theater in the Cineplex building. The building's still there. The theater's still there. Like 40 seats and 25 people. And there was genuine excitement. We were hoping for something interesting. And as opposed to, 300 people holding their breath, this was 25 people each giving up at a different point in time.
You could tell.
Yeah.
That person's out now.
Yeah, somebody checked out the second Jeff Bridges spoke because those choices are...
It's such a bad performance.
Yeah, and it really is. And I get it, he's trying to be as far from, I think...
Oh, the original. Yeah. Like he didn't want to go down that road.
An accent, he's doing a thing with his jaw, he's doing stuff.
Even the hair.
Yeah. And it's all working against our concept because everybody in that room knows the movie.
That's right.
And, that's not right. And somebody gave up right away. Somebody else lasted a couple of scenes. And we're all just kind of hoping that the rest of the film will find a tone that matches him or makes sense of him. Nope. And for the entirety of it, except when Sandra Bullock shows up, and I think, if I remember correctly, this is like 6 months after Love Potion #9.
Right.
So she's already been in a couple of films, and we sort of registered that this is...
You could tell this was somebody.
Yeah, you have that crackle when someone's on stage or on screen, like the early Emma Stone movies, where it's like, who the hell is she? She's doing stuff.
Yeah.
And Bullock is there, and she's great, and her scenes with Kiefer Sutherland are solid.
Yep.
And then she's gone, and Johanna Ter Steeg has a different absence in the original Vanishing, because she is much more present in the scenes that there's more time spent with them.
Well,
she has that little monologue. You start to wonder who she is at the very beginning, in the car before everything goes wrong. And then Bullock is in and out in 5 or 10. She doesn't last the same way, but she's so interesting.
She's a good actress.
That when she's gone, something else is missing from the movie. But
sorry to interrupt, but this you just really sparked it. This comes now back to the segue to the remake was that the edit is different in the remake, and it begins with the bad guy and his life.
That's right.
And the whole point of the original, and you brought up the victim there, is that the whole point of the original is that you spend...
Yeah, she persists.
There's a patience that they take to... You meet the couple. You get to know her. By the time she's gone, it's painful because you've fallen in love with her in your own way. You know what I mean? Like, you get it. She's a real person in the real world, and they have a real complex relationship because they're kind of fighting at the...
Yeah.
But the time spent there is a very non-Hollywood way to begin, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just no, there's not going to be any kidnapping yet. You're just going to have to be patient. Because I don't think it's not till around the 18-minute mark that she's taken.
Oh, I remember that first theatrical screening, like, at the Bloor, thinking, this isn't scary. Like, this, why is everything so normal?
Yeah. But it's a nice misdirect.
Why are people responding to
this? But the time spent there, very European, the time spent there is earned later because... So, and there is a lesson in that, because I do think that when I was rewatching the remake, just to remember how bad it is, it's like, part of it is that it's a really flawed choice to begin and spend all this time with Jeff Bridges and so little time with them that, I don't know, it doesn't help, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in some strange self-destructive way, he is trying to demonstrate why it can't be remade, why you can't recapture it.
Like unconsciously or something?
I mean, I have to wonder. He's so clearly an intelligent filmmaker, and his choices are, in the original film and in the remake, there's some stuff there that could have worked or should have gone further. Just the introduction of the Nancy Travis character in the American version shows you what a different movie could have been.
Yeah.
Like, there is a different route for this narrative, and there's another direction it could have taken, and then of course it does take that, and it's massively unsatisfying.
Do we know, is there anything out there that you might know of that was it taken away from him?
I'm going to assume, based on where it was dumped I think it opened in February or March, it's one of those movies that just got thrown out there.
Well, they knew it sucked, I'm sure, by then, but was it taken, did they it
felt like there was some tampering. That last scene, that's got to be a reshoot.
Well, the ending
scene where they just turn down the coffee with an awkward smile.
Do you think so?
That screams pickup to me.
It was horrible.
Because it is, and it's basically just a thumb in the eye of the original film.
It just makes no sense, but I don't...
And it also echoes the last shot of Misery,
yes,
which had come out between the two versions, which seems too obvious for Sluizer to do it, but a studio hack who's just doing a day's reshoots,
right? Maybe
that's clever.
I'm going to make it my mission.
There is
find
not
out.
much out there.
If you don't know, I'm assuming I'm not going to, but I'm going to try hard because I'm so curious about it all. Because like I said, it's kind of tragic. The ending, I mean, I don't. But they must have known they were doing the happy ending before. It was obviously...
Well, the saving Sutherland character, yeah, I think so. But that little tag at the very
But the tag at the end, the denouement at the coffee, yeah.
Everything's not just great, it's fantastic.
Oh, it's a joke, too, right?
Yeah.
It was not a stupid joke.
We were a few of us, and I remember, I think Ebert might have even mentioned this in his review, a few of us at the very end were sort of waiting for the rug to be pulled out and for us to...
Yeah, there'd be another trick. Yeah, right.
Which would be fine.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the sort of thing that's happening on the regular now with the Insidious movies and the Saw.
Yeah.
Like, there's one last trick. But no, that was one of those moments where knowledge of the material actually works against the enjoyment of the remake because everything is going wrong. Like everything is going wrong.
Everything.
And it's not Sutherland's fault.
It's nobody's fault.
Yeah,
it's
maybe Bridges. But just because he chose to do that.
He did choose, but again, the director's job is to say, bad choice, let's not do that, right? Like, let's undo that.
Yeah.
I take much more comfort in the notion, coming back to what I said, it makes me feel better to think that Sluizer said, you're going to pay me how much to come to Hollywood because I'm almost 60, and I'm going to that's more comforting than the thought that it just fell apart and that, in fact, did he not really know what he was doing at the original? Did he just get lucky? Because I don't believe that. Because when I watch the original, I think this is a masterpiece directed by a masterful director, and it's not luck.
No, it's not happenstance.
It's not happenstance. Everything about it, even her casting. So coming back to Kubrick, he had her pegged for his movie Aryan Papers, and she was going to.
Well, it was because of
Vanishing, and he saw her performance.
That's actually what he. That's from the
Oh, is it in the same interview?
Criterion thing. Yeah, he talks about it. And he's flattered.
Yeah,
but also not quite fully believing it. Or that's how he explained. He relates to the story. Yeah. It's like, and he said, "It's going to be this." And it's like, yeah, that's because she's great, and you did that. But the reverse then is that if it is all luck, if it all falls together so perfectly, I don't know. No, I don't believe it. I think, yeah, he knew exactly
There are
what he was
too
doing.
many
He gets
choices.
the tone, he gets the look, he gets the characters.
There's too many choices in the film that I've seen enough times to go, that is a choice that he made, a decision, and it was the right decision, and
Yeah.
it was a masterful stroke. And I don't know, Hollywood. Look, Hollywood has that famous thing of doing that to European filmmakers.
And in the 90s.
And the 90s was the heyday of doing that,
Yeah,
right? And
it's just amazing that Miramax didn't get him first.
exactly, just
they
beat
were
him up.
chewing up everybody.
Yeah, they would just beat him up. You know, and I feel like, though, part of it is that there is a fish out of water element. Spielberg is a born and raised in the system. Even contemporary auteurs that have done well, like a P.T. Anderson, he is L.A. He's born and raised in L.A., right? He knows it as well as he knows anything in his bones. And I do think that a truly European mentality coming over, I don't know, even Michael Haneke's remake, right? Funny Games. It doesn't land.
No, and it's one of those weird things where it feels even more foreign and wrong because it's got Roth and Watts, neither of whom's American, and like literally the only change they made is that the dog is different. It's a retriever instead of a shepherd, and I think with Funny Games, once you put that movie in an American context, it's actually not as interesting because
no, it's not, because there's no metaphor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It just stops working.
Yeah, coming back to that World War II thing, there's no the banality of evil connected to the fact that they have their horrible past. You know, like
Yeah. It also doesn't work to place The Vanishing in an American context simply because America is, it's a predator's paradise. Like it's a huge country, and serial killers are part of the fabric. I mean, even in 1993, it was a thing.
Yeah.
And having it happen in the bucolic countryside of England, the bucolic European countryside is way more disturbing. I mean, now we see those as well, those movies, but
they
in
were new
1988,
then.
it was really quite jarring.
Yeah, you're right. American stuff was probably more urban too, wasn't it? Like for serial killer stuff, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it is in the end. It's density of population, but stuff like even Psycho is a kind of location-based serial killing.
That's
thing.
True.
It sort of sets up the same idea.
That's the fear of being out in the woods.
Yeah, come here and you're going to die.
Yeah,
and The Vanishing is come with me and you're going to die. In the original version, it's deeply disturbing, and in the second one, it's what John Harkness said about The Comfort of Strangers. Anybody who goes down a dark street in Venice with Christopher Walken deserves exactly what they get.
Exactly.
And Bridges is he's radiating weirdness.
Totally.
So there's no, I have the answers. If you just accompany me, you'll get them.
Totally.
That line delivered by him, you just want to run screaming or just hit him with a shovel.
Well, and everyone seems stupid for following him.
Yeah.
I find, whereas in obviously in the original, there is. You feel for why he's doing it. You've kind of lived with him too long enough that you understand that it is an obsession. Mm-hmm. And obsession is not rational.
Yeah, and it's something that he's trying to share with people. Which is the more unsettling thing, is that he's trying to... that's what fascinates me about both versions, because we never see the initial abduction, and I'd love to know how it happened.
Yeah.
I think we are to presume that he chloroformed her.
Yeah, I think... I always... This is a great question, because I always...
Because we see the experiment.
Yeah, because we see him do it every other way. We see how he got it, so we almost don't need to, because you're like, well, he probably it just worked. Mm-hmm. Exactly as he planned.
But I want to see, maybe not so much with Bridges, because it's ridiculous. And that's the other thing, that the inherent impossibility of Sandra Bullock going with him to whatever it is, if he was trying to just sort of coax her, that doesn't make sense either.
Yeah.
But there's that, and then there's also the element of seduction that must have been involved with Ter Steeg in the original version, and that's something that I kind of want to see, because that she's established as such a strong character.
What do you mean by seduction, though? Do you mean that she was flirty?
No, on Donahue's part.
Okay,
on his part, because when his entire pitch throughout the entire film in the original version is that I will tell you if you listen.
Yeah.
Come closer.
Yeah.
And it's that other thing, like, do you think, what is it? Do you think if I really wanted to hurt you, I'd be standing here in the darkest part of the forest?
Yeah, that's right.
Like, just that weird, everything about this guy looks placid and welcoming and inviting and warm, except that it's all wrong and you can feel it. And Bridges' choice to externalize that just means that Sandra Bullock would have hit him in the face with whatever she had nearby and run away, and there'd be no movie. It doesn't make sense that this guy could operate the way he supposedly does. But in the original, it makes sense that he could just exist and wander around and take people.
Yeah, and he is also like, he's so not weird the way that Bridges is. And there's that scene where he, when they were at the parking lot, before he decides to drink the coffee, and he lashes out on him and starts beating him up at the car.
Yeah.
Right? He's just kicking him. He just rages. And so he would. So anybody would. But the way that the character just takes it and doesn't... He's just like, that's not going to... You can beat me up for another 20 minutes if you like. I'm never going to hit you back.
Yeah.
I'm not menacing that way. It's your choice.
It's not his thing.
It's not my thing. You either do or you don't want to know what happened. I really don't care. And you've got nothing on me, by the way. All those details you have, I won't go to jail. So it's really your choice. If you require it, then I will offer that to you. But I don't need it. Like, he's totally ready to go home.
Yeah, and it bolsters his existence in that film, in that world. That's why you don't get the police involved. That's why no one... It makes sense in a way that Bridges doesn't. Bridges is the weirdo at the end of the bar that gets arrested every other night.
The haircut alone.
Yes. Yeah. And just the insistence on the thing he does with his shoulders when he walks, he rolls, is like...
I know.
It's like he's tried so hard his entire life to be arrested and taken away that this is his last resort, that he's just going to start killing people. You know, you had the chance to stop me, you never did. Okay, great.
Well, he's taking pleasure in it all.
Yeah.
That's the other thing.
And way too much.
And way too much.
As an actor as well as a character.
I like that. To me, is one of the nastiest turns in the story of the original, is that our man has actually given up. By the time she comes in and he sees her at the coffee shop, at the coffee machine, he's blown it, right? He was ready to go home.
Yeah.
He laughed it off. Do you remember that part? Because he literally laughed it off. He blew it again, and you can see he's just thinking, oh, who was I kidding, honestly?
Yeah.
This was a stupid thought experiment that I've taken too far because I'm a bit of a perfectionist. But what a joke. Come on.
Right.
You blew it. Let's have a cup of coffee, and you're going to go home, and you're going to get on with your bullshit life. This isn't you. And just the way fate works out, that then she comes and approaches him. And that, to me, is also core to the character, because he doesn't... Again, he can't believe his luck. I mean, it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
Yeah. And of course it gives you that whole godless universe thing, which...
Totally.
Right, I mean, which is undone by the remake as well. No one's coming to save anybody.
That's exactly right.
We are alone.
You hit the nail on the head. That, I should imagine, also would have spoken very strongly to Kubrick. That godless universe, and there's no rhyme or reason to these things, and good people don't, get good things happen, and bad people don't have to suffer. It's just because there is a randomness to it all, and it's horrible. And it's but life is probably, I mean, I think for the most part like that.
I figure we're on our own.
Yeah. And again, I keep coming back to it, but I really do believe that. I think that any intelligent European film that is dealing with suspense, I really believe that was made, through the 50s and 60s and 70s and into the 80s still. There's still an echo of this World War II lingering there, and those were strange messages to deal with, and they were strange, I think, ideas to grow up with, and they do speak to a certain godlessness or to a certain randomness and to a certain banality. And I don't know why, but I've always felt that there was something there. I do, like, coming back to Haneke, I do believe that almost all of his movies are basically, I mean, not Caché, because I think Caché is about the Algerian situation.
That's a very specific
to the
French
Algerian
thing going on there.
Yeah, that's to do with the French colonialism in Algeria, and there was that massacre in was it 1967 in Paris? They drowned a bunch of...
I think so. I think 67.
Yeah. So that was very specific to that, but I feel like all his other work, there's just this kind of lingering echo of that, and The Vanishing, I don't know why, but to me it very much fits into that European psychological torment, and it's them still wrestling with all that stuff.
Yeah. Weirdly enough, the one I was thinking of this time was La Ventura, which has a literal...
Antonioni?
Yeah, I mean, there's a literal vanishing in it, but it just feels like that kind of thing where your entire life is derailed by something that you had no control over.
Well, yeah, that's like the Holocaust. That's how I look at that. It's like the
arrival of the Nazis in the rest of Europe. Just whatever you plan to do, it's over.
It's over now.
Yeah.
I think you were bang on there, and I think another reference for that, for me, I believe it was made the same year, or maybe it was the year prior, is Frantic by Roman Polanski.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think you're right.
Yeah, it's either the same year or within 6 months. You know, it's like it's right in that pocket.
Yeah.
And the scene of... Because I just rewatched it recently, and it's really good. It's definitely his nod to Hitchcock. It's a Hitchcock through and through.
Like all I remember about it.
It's pure Hitchcock, right?
Deliberate shots and things like that.
Yeah, and the roof sequence. And I mean, it's pure Hitchcock, but... there is this existential trauma that happens when his wife is just missing. And it's like, well, where is she? And nobody has an answer. And nobody actually really cares. Mm-hmm. And they kind of care, but they only care in as much as the guy in The Vanishing who's working at the gas station, he's the manager, he's saying, yes, fine. And when he's saying, well, let's go through all the pennies in the coffee machine, his fingerprints will be on there. And the guy's kind of looking at him just being like, you don't get it. That's not going to happen, right? Like, for all you know, she's having an affair on you. Nobody cares. Mm-hmm. And in Frantic, that's exactly what happens. Yeah. And I feel like there is a connective tissue there to that World War II feeling where it's like, no, we understand that you have family who have now been taken, but what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
Right?
It happens to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just like, there's nothing I can do about that. You're kind of on your own. There's a real echo to that. Frantic's really good.
I never really considered the parallels. I mean, just the synchronicity of it.
It's I don't know who got there first.
Of each other. Well, Frantic, I know, was a spring release here.
Was it 88 though, Frantic, or was it 87?
I think it was 88. Might be 87, but right around there anyway. It's on I think it's on a double bill Blu-ray somewhere with Presumed Innocent from Warner.
The Alan J. Pakula movie?
Yeah.
With Harrison Ford?
Yeah, it was the Harrison Ford link.
And Sandy Stern, that character Sandy Stern.
Yeah, Raoul Julia.
Yeah, Raoul Julia, that's right.
One of the great Raoul Julia.
When Sandy Stern shows up, it just like, and he brings the heat.
Oh, no, I'll watch that again.
Yeah, that's
this
good
is
movie.
The beauty of having everything at my fingertips. And screw you, iTunes. Physical media forever. But yeah, so this basically does sort of, we're starting to drift into influences and connections, so that, I mean, it sets it up perfectly. Is there anything from The Vanishing that you have borrowed or stolen or absorbed into your own creative DNA? I didn't really see a lot of it in Trench 11.
No.
When you suggested it, I thought, oh, okay.
Yeah, they're very different films.
Except for the European tension thing.
Yeah, like the European tension thing is something that I'm going to spend my whole career trying to master. Okay. And if I get halfway there, I'll be happy. So yes, there's that, but there is, but I didn't realize it until I painfully scanned through the remake again in preparation of this conversation, and it did go into my psyche, and that's being trapped underground with a lighter and nothing else.
Okay.
And in fact, further to that, I realized when I saw Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah, I mean,
wake up in the dark.
There is that.
Took out a Zippo, and he's trapped. And the opening and ending of Trench 11, Ross of Sutherland, is in the dark, underground, buried alive, and he only has a match.
Yeah.
And I think that may... that's an overt thing that I was unaware of.
Right.
So whether that's it or not, I don't know. But yeah, no, they're very different films, but I beyond that, I just aspire to... I don't know. The Vanishing 2 is just so smart. It's so refreshing that it's just really intelligent, and it's shamelessly intelligent. It doesn't care. It doesn't really. There's so many tiny moments you can see that they're just getting out of the scene or getting into the scene, or they're not telling you everything. But it's okay. You get it. You're following it. You're with it. The characters are smart too. They're always making choices that make sense. I don't know. I find it really rare. I really do, especially in genre films. Especially in thrillers, or there's such a tendency to want to do exactly what they did in the remake, which is get it bigger, make it bigger, jump it out, all that stuff. And I really admire. Actually, there is another influence there. I think that, off mic before, you and I were just referencing, and we were talking about Jacques Tourneu's films. I do think that there's something about the calmness of suspense that I find very scary. And there's certain scenes, like in Cat People, where, like that pool scene, there's nothing happening. It's just audio.
Yeah.
And it's what you imagine to be around the character that you can't see. Certainly in Trench 11, I try to mine that as much as possible. And The Vanishing is not directly like that, but there is a kind of like, you just know that there's so much else happening just around you that you're not seeing, probably because you never see the kidnapping. You never see her held hostage. You don't see a lot of the stuff. But the emphasis is on the psyche of it.
It's like a placid frame almost.
Yeah,
things
totally.
Are really calm and
Totally.
yeah, and awful things are lurking beyond the. Well, now I think we experience that in horror films all the time now, but it's in that weird trick that we're all used to, where the sound drops out just before the scare.
Yeah.
And everybody has developed an immunity to that. And you sort of brace yourself for it. When you hear the soundtrack go away, it's just like, oh, something's coming.
It's going to happen.
Yeah, is it a cat or is it actually the killer? That's the only question.
Yeah.
But when a whole movie is that calm, there's no release, and your brain just starts to turn in on itself.
I'm dying to make a film, and I will one day, where there's a lot less score. Because that's the other thing I noticed with those Euro films.
Mm-hmm.
Like The Vanishing, there's only score when there needs to be score.
Yeah.
Like Rafifi, it's like the whole heist, there's no score. And that really, I noticed that, whereas conversely the remake, it's Jerry Goldsmith, who made countless brilliant scores, like, even like, I think Planet of the Apes, he did that. It's like one of my favorite, like, it's so cool. So the guy did incredible work, but when you hear it in the remake, you're like, it's so hokey. It's wall-to-wall scary time. It's all, now we're all going to get scared. And in the original, there's so much less score. So much less.
Oh, no, less is almost always more. I think this is a perfect example of that. The fact that there are things we don't see, there are connections that we are forced to make because there's no exposition.
Yeah.
That's how you get into people's heads and freak them out.
I even actually watched Sully last night. I don't know if you saw it.
I have seen, yeah.
I don't know if you're a fan of it or not. But I thought some of the most effective elements in that film was when the plane stuff was happening and there was no score.
Yeah.
Right? There was no score. It helps you get into the moment.
Yeah, and especially since with Sully is a fascinating experiment in finding a feature film in 48 seconds of heroism. Right? Like the idea that you have to build in flashbacks and flash forwards and follow him around New York and all of that stuff, which is interesting because I found, I don't think the film works throughout.
No, probably not.
But watching Tom Hanks struggle with everyone loving him is really interesting to me.
Yeah,
I think that's a great choice for that actor.
Yeah.
And Jake Gyllenhaal does it in Stronger too, the ambivalent response to about the Boston Marathon survivor.
Oh yeah.
And it's
Who
somebody
directed that? It's not Peter Berg, is it?
David Gordon Green, I think.
He did?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yes, it is. In fact, it is because there's somebody in this middle class, working class Boston family has a copy of Snow Angels in their DVD rack.
Are you kidding?
Like, no, they don't. Come on.
He's kind of like the new Soderbergh to me. He's quite really has no genre.
He seems to be willing to do anything.
He goes all over the place.
Halloween coming to TIFF next month.
He's got Halloween comedies with on HBO. What's his name?
Danny McBride.
Danny McBride
who co-wrote Halloween.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And apparently is not a comedy.
Because I was going on a recent Malick binge again, and I just had to return to, and I was rewatching like Badlands, and and he EP'd David Gordon Green's first movie, right? Undertow.
That's right.
And
Undertow.
No, sorry, that's his second movie.
Was
the George Washington
right?
one.
Yeah, George Washington.
Yeah. So maybe it was his third, but it was sort of
then
big.
There's All the Real Girls.
All the Real Girls,
which I love and has disappeared from the world apparently.
It kind of has.
Yeah.
You would have thought though, by the time Undertow was going and Malick is EPing it, that, and based on his two previous films, that was going to be his thing. Yeah, right. And that was just quite fascinating. Yeah, like Halloween, but then Stronger. Like, where does that fit in? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's an interesting guy. And what was that called though? The HBO show with Danny McBride.
Oh, Eastbound and Down.
Eastbound and Down. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. He's just going with. I mean, I assume he's going where the work is, but also he's able to do all the work, so he gets more of this stuff, as opposed to, Malick, who can only function.
Malick can only,
right?
and even then, almost not always.
Yeah, that's absolutely
like quite rarely can he. But when I don't know, the other thing I revisited was Thin Red Line.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember when that came out the same summer, Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
And I saw it second. And
it was the fall. It was the Christmas release.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ryan was in the summer. They actually shifted them around at one point.
They opened. I think Fox get them away from each other.
Yeah. Fox was planning to open the Thin Red Line in the summer, but it didn't work out.
Or they backed it off.
Maybe, or it wasn't finished. I mean, it's certainly possible he was still cutting.
Or more than likely not finished. Yeah. And I remember at the time it couldn't live up because the D-Day invasion and Private Ryan was just so radical. But I rewatched it and I was kind of quite floored. I was like, this is Malick going full Malick, and it totally works. Yeah. And nobody else could make a movie quite like this.
I've been meaning to revisit it. I do have the Blu-ray over there.
Do you? Yeah.
I have all the Blu-rays.
It's worth it. It really... I was surprised how well it stood up.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. And I'm just trying to think of a way out in terms of The Vanishing to get it back, but Malick is so far removed. I mean, I'd love to see his treatment of he's never made a thriller, really. Like, Badlands is sort of...
Badlands is a crime thriller.
It has thriller elements, but the pacing is completely different. I'd love to... Like, a film that meditates in the prelude the way The Vanishing does.
But that's sort of... They are in... Not to BS here, there is the connection in that the emphasis is on psychology. Yeah. The emphasis is not on the rhetoric of the film. It's not on the formal rhetoric either.
Yeah, it's the attraction of...
Yeah, it's the psychological state of the characters, and by extension, an overall state of being that the movie starts to encompass. Because Badlands does very much take that on. They're sociopathic.
Yeah,
right?
We're in their heads by
halfway through. Yeah, by halfway through, you are literally... You are inside Sissy Spacek and Martin Sheen's heads, and they are sociopathic. They're totally sociopathic. It's just done with kind of maybe more poetry and a different approach. But it is the emphasis on psychology over anything else, and that's certainly to me why The Vanishing is special, because it's just so easy to make that movie in such a different kind of a way. And look, Hitchcock made that movie a couple times, or a version of that movie a couple times, where it was way less psychological, and it's still great. And I'm not saying one's better than the other, but...
Yeah. They're all asking the same question. Like, they're all making the same invitation. Come walk with me and let's see what happens.
Yeah, and there's a kind of existential dread. That's what always upsets me. Is I feel that there's an existential pain. His nightmare of not being able to find her, to me, and it's unanswerable and nobody really cares, that's life. You basically are on your own.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you are, and it's very painful that...
It's painful to know it, right? That's what this movie's about. That's what The Vanishing ends on. It's the, oh no, here's your answer.
Because he could have... She's his new girlfriend is a wonderful person who adores him. Mm-hmm. And doesn't she say something like, I think she says something like, let's move to, like...
Stop it and leave, yeah.
Yeah, basically. Move to, basically move, somewhere else and just go have a life. I think she, references the Caribbean or something like that. But yeah, he can't. He can't.
Yeah. And he gets his answer, and...
Yeah.
Yeah. So do we, and then the lights come up.
I'm very envious, I have to say, that to have seen it when it was fresh. Because to see it now, if it came out next year and I went to the Lightbox... I would think 95% of the audience would have already seen it. Yeah. Right? And we'd all be there to see a restored film print and the pleasure of seeing it on the big screen. Have a glass of wine.
It's a very different experience when you don't know what's going on.
Like for you to... I'm so envious to have seen it then, and the Bloor's like a proper theater. People must have been just rocked.
Yeah, there was a lot of silence. And then there were other people immediately going, and you knew? And you brought me to this? That's always fun, when you get to see people turn on each other.
What were the other big twist endings back then? There really weren't a lot, right? Obviously Psycho way before that, but what are the other big twists? Like they weren't in vogue, right?
No. This was a good 6 or 7 years before The Usual Suspects even. So,
right.
It just wasn't part of the language, part of the general expectation.
That's right. The Usual Suspects and The Sixth Sense were the two ones that I remember kind of booting this whole...
Yeah, those are the ones that... There must be something I'm not thinking of, but...
Yeah,
in terms
of
70s, things were pretty linear. Movies played fair.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was part of the disturbance too. In this is that it is playing fair with you. It's just that you don't see it coming.
That's right.
And neither do they. And that's right. Again, it works insidiously well.
Yeah.
My thanks to Leo Scherman, whose first feature, Trench 11, is in theaters across Canada right now and available on iTunes in the US and Canada today. Thanks also to Macy Armstrong and Ingrid Hamilton. They know what they did. You can find Leo on Twitter at Leo Scherman, all one word, and you can find The Vanishing on Blu-ray and DVD in a fine special edition from the Criterion Collection. It's also available on iTunes and on Filmstruck and Amazon in the US. The remake is around, but... As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you feel like leaving a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever you enjoy the show, that would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps, it truly does. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening. Oh, and next week's episode drops on Monday instead of Tuesday, so you'll want to be ready for that. It's kind of special.